9,000 years ago, a person somewhere in the Americas put a hollow reed to their lips, held it over burning leaves, and inhaled. That single act, that one strange decision, started a chain reaction that would eventually kill 1 billion people. And we still don't fully understand why they did it. But here's what's wild. Smoking didn't start in one place. It started in at least 3 separate places at roughly the same time, with people who had no idea the others existed. That's not a coincidence. That tells us something deep about human nature, something we haven't fully figured out yet. There's one reason ancient people started smoking that has nothing to do with getting high, nothing to do with religion, and nothing to do with medicine. It's strange, almost funny. I'm going to come back to that. First, let's go back to the beginning. Before we talk about when humans started smoking, we need to talk about what was even available to smoke, because this isn't obvious. Picture the ancient world. No tobacco shops, no rolling papers, just wilderness, dense, untouched, wild plant life stretching in every direction. But nature is full of psychoactive plants. More than 4,000 species of plants on this planet produce chemicals that affect the human brain. That's not an accident. Plants evolved those chemicals as a defense, to confuse or repel insects and animals. Humans found them anyway. In the highlands of South America, wild tobacco grew in thick clusters along the Andean slopes. In Central Asia, wild cannabis grew like a weed, literally. In the forests of Mexico, morning glory vines produced seeds containing natural compounds similar to LSD. The ancient world was a pharmacy, an unlocked one, and early humans were curious, dangerously curious. Here's the first clue that someone, at some point, made a deliberate choice to inhale smoke from these plants. Not just touch them, not just eat them, burn them, and breathe what came out. The oldest hard evidence we have for intentional smoking comes from 2 places, and the dates are going to surprise you. First stop, the Jirzinkal Cemetery in the Pamir Mountains of western China. In 2019, archaeologist Yimin Yang and his team were excavating wooden braziers, small, ancient fire containers, from burial sites dated to around 500 BC. Inside those braziers, they found burnt cannabis seeds, and when they tested the chemical residue still trapped in the wood after 2,500 years, they found elevated levels of THC, a psychoactive compound in cannabis. This wasn't hemp for rope. This wasn't accident. Someone deliberately burned high-potency cannabis plants in an enclosed space during a funeral ritual. They were getting high at a burial ceremony. Think about that for a second. The oldest confirmed evidence of intentional cannabis smoking is from a funeral. But that's not even the oldest evidence of smoking we have. Go further back. Go to the Andes Mountains of South America, around 3000 BC. That's 5,000 years ago. Researchers studying ancient sites in Peru and Bolivia found pipes, small, carefully carved pipes made from bone and stone, with dark residue packed inside them. When scientists ran chemical analysis on that residue, they found nicotine, tobacco, deliberately cultivated, deliberately dried, deliberately smoked. But here's what's weird about this. The people smoking that tobacco were not a small, isolated group. By 3000 BC, tobacco use had already spread across a huge portion of South America, which means it started even earlier. We just haven't found that evidence yet. So the oldest smoking tradition we know of is at least 5,000 years old, and it probably goes back further. Much further. You're going to ask me, how do we even know this? Smoke disappears. It's literally designed to vanish. How does an archaeologist find something that evaporates into the air? Great question, and the answer is actually beautiful. 3 things survive. First, seeds. When you burn a plant, the seeds don't always fully combust. Tiny charred seeds can survive for thousands of years in the right conditions. In clay pots, in burial sites, under layers of sediment. Archaeologists can look at those seeds under a microscope and identify the exact species. Second, chemical residue. This is the big one. When smoke moves through a pipe, through wood, through ceramics, it leaves behind trace chemicals that bind to the material. Those chemicals don't evaporate. They stay locked in the pores of the clay or wood for centuries. Modern mass spectrometry, a technique that identifies molecules by their weight and behavior, can detect those chemicals even from a tiny fragment of ancient pipe. We're talking parts per billion, It's like reading a ghost. Third, human remains. This is where it gets genuinely eerie. Researchers studying Egyptian mummies have found nicotine and cocaine residue in mummified hair and tissue. Ancient Egyptians who died 3,000 years ago tested positive for substances that officially shouldn't have reached Egypt until the 1500s. We'll come back to that too, because it raises a question that nobody has fully answered. So ancient people were smoking, but why? Why would a human being look at a burning plant, watch smoke come off it, and decide, yes, I want to put that in my lungs? There are a few obvious answers, but one answer is strange. I'm going to come back to that. Let me give you the obvious ones first. Reason 1. Ritual and religion. In almost every ancient culture where we find evidence of smoking, it's connected to ceremony. The Jirzangkal burial site in China, the shamanic traditions of the Amazon, where ayahuasca and tobacco were used to enter altered states and communicate with spirits. The ancient Maya who depicted their gods smoking in carved stone reliefs that date back to 600 AD. Even the word shaman, a word we now use globally, comes from Siberian traditions where smoke was central to spiritual practice. For these cultures, smoke wasn't a product. It was a medium, a signal to the gods. The act of watching something transform from solid to invisible was itself sacred. You were sending a message. Reason 2. Medicine. Tobacco was used medicinally across the pre-Columbian Americas in ways that actually made sense. Applied to skin, nicotine repels parasites. Blown into wounds, it has mild antiseptic properties. Indigenous healers across dozens of cultures used tobacco not to get a buzz, but to treat infections, reduce swelling, and manage pain. Modern pharmacology has since confirmed that nicotine has genuine pain-blocking effects at low doses. Reason 3. Social bonding. This is underrated. Sharing a pipe creates intimacy. It's an act of trust. You are literally taking something that was just inside another person's body. Anthropologists have documented how pipe sharing in dozens of cultures functioned the same way sharing food does, as a declaration of peace, kinship, or alliance. The Native American peace pipe wasn't just a symbol, it was a technology for trust. But none of those are the strange reason I promised you. Okay, ready? Here it is. Insect repellent. That's it. That is the weird one. In the jungles and wetlands of ancient South America, insects weren't just annoying. Mosquitoes carried malaria and yellow fever. Flies carried disease. At night they were everywhere. And fire, it turns out, was the single most effective tool ancient humans had against them. The smoke from burning certain plants, tobacco, artemisia, dried herbs, drove insects away. The smoke from burning certain plants, tobacco, artemisia, dried herbs, drove insects away. Researcher Dolores Piperno at the Smithsonian Institution has argued that some of the earliest human encounters with psychoactive plant smoke may have been entirely accidental. People built fires using whatever wood and plant matter was nearby. Some of those plants produced psychoactive smoke. They felt strange. They felt good. They remembered which plants did that. And the transition from burning plants nearby to actively inhaling their smoke, that probably happened in a specific environment. One where the insects were so bad that people started holding smoldering bundles close to their faces, literally fumigating themselves. The first people who smoked might not have been spiritual seekers. They might just have been really tired of mosquitoes. Let that sink in. So smoking started in multiple places for multiple reasons. But how did it spread from a funeral ceremony in the Pamir Mountains or a riverside community in the Andes to every continent on Earth? Trade routes. This is something we often forget about the ancient world. Long before Columbus, long before the Silk Road as we formally name it, humans were trading across enormous distances. Obsidian from volcanic islands appeared in graves hundreds of miles inland. Shells from the Pacific Ocean showed up in the American Southwest. Ideas traveled. Plants traveled. Cannabis made its way from Central Asia westward into the Middle East and Northern Africa, along the same routes that carried textiles and spices. By 440 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus was describing Scythian nomads throwing cannabis seeds onto hot stones inside enclosed tents and inhaling the vapor. He seemed bewildered by it, but he noticed it, which means it had spread that far by then. Tobacco's journey is stranger. It was locked inside the Americas for thousands of years. When European explorers arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, they found indigenous people smoking rolled tobacco leaves. Within 50 years, tobacco had spread to Europe, Africa, and Asia. the fastest spread of any agricultural product in human history. Within a century of contact, people in Japan were growing tobacco. People in West Africa were smoking pipes. Within a century of contact, people in Japan were growing tobacco. People in West Africa were smoking pipes. The demand was instant and total. Why? Because nicotine works. It crosses the blood-brain barrier in seconds. It releases dopamine. The human brain responds to it powerfully. Once you tried it, you wanted more. That wasn't weak character, that was chemistry. But everything I just told you makes smoking sound intentional, deliberate, a series of choices made by rational people. What if we're wrong about that? Some researchers, including archaeobotanist Anna Revedin, who has studied plant use at European prehistoric sites, argue that the earliest encounters with psychoactive smoke were almost certainly accidental. Campfires built with local materials, certain plants thrown on the fire, certain effects noticed. Picture a family group in the hills of what is now Jordan, 12,000 years ago. They build a fire. They throw on dried wild plants from the valley floor, some of them psychoactive. The fire creates a dense, low-hanging cloud of smoke. The people sitting around it start to feel strange, calm, maybe euphoric. They don't understand why. They think the place is magical. They come back to the same spot. They build the fire again. And this time, they pay more attention to which plants they use. That's not a history of invention. That's a history of noticing, of paying attention. That might be a more honest description of how most human discoveries work. The line between accident and intention is blurrier than we like to think. Here's the saddest thing about this whole story. Ancient people probably knew something was wrong. We have mummies, we have bones, we have teeth, and the physical evidence tells a grim story. Researchers studying the remains of ancient tobacco users in the American Southwest found lung discoloration consistent with chronic smoke inhalation. A study published in 2010 by bioarchaeologist Stoyan Mihailova found signs of respiratory stress in skeletal remains from communities with high pipe use. Ancient teeth found alongside pipes often show yellowing and wear patterns consistent with long-term smoking, and yet people kept doing it. Why? Because the benefits, social, spiritual, pharmacological, were immediate and real. The damage was slow and invisible. This is not unique to ancient humans. This is just humans. We are very good at ignoring slow dangers. We always have been. The people who built the great ceremonial mounds of the American Midwest smoked pipes. The priests who performed rituals in Mayan temples smoked. The merchants who traded along the Silk Road smoked. They all knew something about smoke was powerful. Some of them probably sensed it was also harmful. They made the same calculation we make. The feeling right now outweighs the consequence later. They made the same calculation we make. The feeling right now outweighs the consequence later. We started with one person in the ancient Americas putting a reed to their lips and changing history. But here's what I didn't tell you at the beginning. That choice, to inhale burning plant matter, is almost certainly older than any pipe we found, older than any confirmed archaeological site. Some researchers believe intentional smoking goes back 30,000 years, maybe more, to a time before agriculture, before cities, before writing. Which means this habit is not a product of civilization. It predates civilization. It is in some strange way part of what made us who we are. The desire to alter our own consciousness, the willingness to endure mild pain for a powerful experience, the hunger to feel something different from right now. That impulse didn't start with tobacco or cannabis. It started with curiosity and a fire, and it hasn't stopped. If this made you think about how other habits moved across human history, you're going to want to watch what I found out about alcohol.